He hid a fugitive alien princess. Days later, her fleet surrounded Earth. The cargo hauler shuddered as Ethan Reyes threaded it through the Mars orbital blockade, his fingers dancing across manual controls worn smooth by years of use. Corporate patrol drones drifted past his viewports like lazy predators, their sensor arrays sweeping for contraband. But Ethan had run this route enough times to know their blind spots. The medical supplies strapped in his main hold would keep colony workers alive another month, assuming he didn't get vaporized for his trouble. He was adjusting his approach vector when the bioscan alert chimed. Ethan's hand froze halfway to the thruster control. The sound was wrong, a sustained tone instead of the usual blip and clear. He pulled up the sensor readout, watching the data resolve into something impossible. Life sign, humanoid, originating from cargo container 7, which according to his manifest contained industrial lubricants and nothing else. "Shit," he whispered. He'd been paid triple rate to haul that container, no questions asked. That kind of money meant either someone had questions worth avoiding or someone was lying to him. Possibly both. Ethan unstrapped and pushed himself toward the cargo bay, his movements automatic in the reduced spin gravity. The container sat exactly where he'd loaded it 3 days ago, anonymous gray composite with a private contractor's seal. He pressed his palm against the access panel, overriding the lock with his captain's authorization. The door hissed open. A woman lay crumpled inside, limbs folded at angles that suggested she'd been unconscious when someone sealed her in. Not a woman, Ethan corrected himself as his brain caught up with his eyes. Her skin was emerald green, darker along her shoulders where her torn clothing exposed bare flesh. Long black hair spilled across her face, and when Ethan reached down to check for a pulse, her skin felt cool under his fingertips. Baelith, every instinct screamed at him to seal the container and jettison it into Mars's gravity well. Let someone else find the corpse. But her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and Ethan had seen enough dying to recognize dehydration and exhaustion rather than something immediately fatal. Her eyes opened, golden with vertical pupils that contracted in the cargo bay's harsh lighting. "Ethan Reyes," she said, her voice barely more than a rasp. He jerked back, hand-dropping to the stunner he kept maglocked to his thigh. "How do you know my name?" "I paid for your route, specifically." She tried to sit up and failed, slumping against the container's interior. "Your transponder profile avoids Imperial scanning protocols. You were my best option." "Option for what?" Before she could answer, proximity alarms shrieked through the ship's comm system. Ethan's heads-up display flashed red as a vessel materialized from stealth approach, sleek and predatory, where his hauler was blunt and functional. Baelith military design, all aggressive angles and power systems that probably cost more than his entire ship. The comm crackled. "Unidentified cargo vessel. This is Baelith Patrol Corvette designation Cassveneer. You will submit to boarding and inspection. We are searching for stolen Imperial property. Comply immediately or you will be disabled." Ethan looked at the woman in his cargo bay. Her golden eyes held his, and he saw fear there. Real fear, the kind that made people do desperate things. "Please," she whispered. He'd sworn after Amara died that he'd never trust anything Baelith again. That oath had kept him alive for 3 years. It should have been easy to hand this woman over and collect whatever reward the Empire offered for returning their property. Instead, Ethan grabbed her arm and hauled her upright. "Can you move?" She nodded, though her legs trembled when she tried to stand. "Reactor compartment, now." He half-dragged her through the narrow corridors of his ship, her weight slight despite her height. The reactor compartment was barely large enough for emergency repairs, designed for brief exposure to radiation shielding maintenance, not habitation. When he opened the hatch, heat rolled out in waves. "In there?" She stared at the cramped space. "Unless you've got a better idea in the next 30 seconds. She climbed inside without further protest, folding her long limbs into angles that looked painful. Ethan sealed the hatch and sprinted back to the cockpit, throwing himself into the pilot's seat just as his external cameras showed the docking clamp extending from the Baelith Corvette. 5 figures boarded, 4 moved with military efficiency, weapons ready, scanning equipment active. The fifth walked like he owned the universe and everything in it, his emerald skin marked with ritual scarring along his jaw. "I am Commander Thalix Genevar," he said, his voice formal and measured. "You will show me your cargo manifests and provide access to all sealed compartments." Ethan pulled up the documents on his console, watching the commander's golden eyes track across the data. The other Valeth soldiers moved through the ship with practiced precision, their boots ringing on the deck plating. One paused outside the reactor compartment, his scanner chirping. "Commander residual heat signature above ambient." Thalix walked to the compartment hatch, resting one hand against it. His eyes met Ethan's across the narrow corridor. "Reactor maintenance," Ethan said, keeping his voice level. "Replaced a coupling yesterday. System still bleeding heat." The lie was barely plausible. Thalix knew it, Ethan knew it. The silence stretched between them like a blade's edge. "Log the anomaly," Thalix said finally. "Continue sweep." The inspection took 15 minutes that felt like hours. When they finally detached and the Corvette pulled away, Ethan sat motionless until his sensors confirmed they'd resumed patrol trajectory. Only then did he unseal the reactor compartment. The woman emerged drenched in sweat, her emerald skin flushed darker with heat. She collapsed against the corridor wall, breathing hard. "Who are you?" Ethan demanded. "And don't tell me you're just some refugee. They don't send patrol corvettes for refugees." She looked up at him, and in the dim corridor lighting, her skin seemed to shift through shades of green he couldn't quite track. Pale where fear showed through, deeper where something else surfaced. "My name is Sareth Velani. My mother is Empress Callus, ruler of the Valeth matriarchy. I'm fleeing an arranged marriage designed to legitimize her planned annexation of your colonies." Ethan felt the deck drop away beneath him. "You're the princess." "I was." Her voice carried quiet defiance. "Now I'm a fugitive asking a human smuggler to help me reach Earth before my mother's fleet arrives to demand my return." "And if they can't find you?" "Then your species becomes leverage to force my cooperation. Which is why I'm offering you enough currency to disappear for the rest of your life if you get me safely to ground." Ethan laughed, bitter and sharp. "You think I want your money? 3 years ago, my sister died in a Valeth diplomatic incident over Jupiter Station. Your people called it collateral damage." Sareth's skin paled, genuine grief crossing her features. "I cannot give you back what you lost, but I can tell you that marriage will end with more incidents like the one that killed your sister. My mother sees humans as obstacles or tools, never equals. This union consolidates her power and begins formal colonization protocols." She met his eyes steadily. "You asked why I need someone with nothing to lose, because everyone else has something my mother can threaten." The words hit harder than Ethan wanted to admit. He looked at this woman, this princess who'd folded herself into a radiation-soaked compartment rather than face whatever waited in imperial custody, and saw terror barely contained beneath trained composure. "Fine," he said, "but I'm not doing it for your money. I'm doing it because if hiding you pisses off your empire, that's reason enough." As he plotted their approach to Earth, Sareth's skin flickered through shades she seemed unable to control, exhaustion breaking down whatever discipline kept her emotions hidden. In that moment, she looked less like royalty and more like someone drowning, reaching for anything solid. Ethan turned back to his controls, already regretting every choice that had led him here, and made the calculations that would take them home. Earth's orbital approach lanes were a controlled chaos of traffic that Ethan navigated with practiced ease, sliding his hauler into a descent vector reserved for agricultural shipments. By the time traffic control noticed the discrepancy in his transponder codes, he'd already committed to re-entry, banking hard through the upper atmosphere until friction heated his hull to temperatures that made Sareth grip her seat restraints with knuckles that darkened to forest green. They touched down in the industrial sprawl south of New Lagos just after local midnight, the city's lights spreading beneath them like bioluminescent algae. Ethan killed his engines and sat for a moment, letting the reality sink in. He'd smuggled Valeth royalty past 3 military checkpoints and an orbital defense grid. There was no walking this back. "Where now?" Sareth asked. Someone who won't shoot us immediately. Ethan stood, joints protesting after hours in the pilot's seat. Maybe. The undercity tunnels beneath New Lagos had been built for old subway systems and forgotten infrastructure, now home to markets that operated outside corporate oversight. Ethan led Sarah through passages lit by salvaged LED strips, past stalls selling protein synthesizers and black market medical supplies. People stared at Sarah's green skin and pointed ears, but in the undercity, strange was relative. Nobody asked questions when questions attracted attention. Maya Cross's shop occupied a reinforced alcove behind a noodle vendor, its entrance marked only by a faded technical schematic that meant nothing to civilians. Ethan knocked twice, paused, knocked 3 more times. The door opened a crack. Maya's cybernetic eye glowed faintly as it scanned them both. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. "Can we come in, or should I just wait here for the Imperial Death Squad?" Maya stepped aside, her stocky frame blocking the entrance until she'd verified the corridor was empty. Inside, the shop was organized chaos. Workbenches covered with disassembled electronics, diagnostic equipment humming, and enough weapons to hold off a small army mounted on racks that Ethan suspected could deploy with a single command. "That's Valeth royalty," Maya said flatly, locking the door behind them. "Princess Sareth Villani," Sareth said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I understand this places you at considerable risk." Maya ignored the hand. "Damn right it does. Ethan, what were you thinking?" That her marriage refusal might prevent the Valeth from claiming jurisdiction over the Jovian mining rights. Maya's expression shifted from hostility to calculation in the space of a breath. She looked at Sareth with new assessment. The marriage was announced 6 months ago. Consolidation treaty between Valeth factions with human colonies as negotiating leverage. Maya crossed her arms. "You're telling me that's off?" "It was never legitimate," Sareth said. "The union was designed to produce an heir that would—" She stopped, something crossing her features that made her skin pale. "It doesn't matter. What matters is preventing my mother from using Earth as a bargaining chip to force my return." Maya studied her for another moment, then nodded. "Back room. I'll make you documentation that might fool short-range bioscanners, but if Imperial sensors get a clean sweep, you're done." The back room was barely large enough for 2 people, let alone 3. Ethan and Sareth sat on opposite sides of a parts crate while Maya worked in the main shop, the sound of her tools a steady rhythm through the thin walls. In the confined space, Ethan became acutely aware of details he'd ignored during the desperate flight from Mars. The way Sareth's pointed ears tracked sounds he couldn't hear, the faint luminescence her skin gave off in darkness. The fact that she smelled nothing like a human, something mineral and clean like stone after rain. "You don't have to do this," Sareth said quietly. "Maya's right. I've already destroyed your life. Your ship is probably flagged, your identification compromised. You could still..." "Still what? Turn you in and hope they don't space me for harboring you in the first place?" Ethan shook his head. "I made my choice back in that cargo bay. I'm not great at unmaking choices." "You carry anger like armor," Sareth observed. "Your sister. You loved her deeply." "Don't." The word came out sharper than intended. "You don't get to analyze me." "I wasn't analyzing. I was recognizing." Her golden eyes held steady on his face. "I had a brother. He died in the war my mother is trying to end through this marriage. She told me his sacrifice proved the necessity of peace at any cost. But he didn't sacrifice himself. He was killed. There's a difference." The admission hung between them, raw and unexpected. Ethan found himself speaking before he could stop. Amara was 23, studying xenobiology on Jupiter Station because she wanted to understand alien species, build bridges. Then a Valeth diplomatic vessel had a navigational malfunction and crashed into the civilian quarter. 17 dead. Your people paid compensation to the families and called it resolved. "I'm sorry," Sareth said, and the words carried weight that felt genuine. "Truly. My people, we're taught that individual grief is weakness, that collective stability matters more than personal loss. But I've learned that philosophy only works if you're the one deciding which losses are acceptable." Before Ethan could respond, the shop's entrance alarm chimed. Maya appeared in the doorway, her expression grim. Corporate security. Full sweep of the district, anonymous tip about alien activity. She tossed Ethan a compact pistol. Out the maintenance tunnel now. 3 blocks east, there's an abandoned water facility. I'll signal when it's clear. They ran through passages that grew progressively older, the architecture shifting from modern composite to ancient concrete and steel. Behind them, voices echoed, augmented by the electronic chirp of scanning equipment. Ethan pulled Sareth into a junction point, pressing them both against the wall as boots thundered past their hiding spot. The water reclamation facility loomed at the edge of the Undercity, a relic from before atmospheric processors made such systems obsolete. Ethan forced open a service entrance and they slipped inside, into darkness broken only by emergency lighting that had somehow remained active across decades of abandonment. They found a control room on the 2nd level, its windows overlooking vast empty tanks that had once held millions of gallons. Ethan set up a perimeter alert using a scanner Maya had pressed into his hand, then settled against the wall to wait. "I've never made a decision purely for myself before," Sareth said into the silence. "Everything I've done has been measured against duty, tradition, imperial necessity. Even fleeing was calculated. I ran because staying would cause more harm than leaving." "You're looking for permission to feel good about it," Ethan said. "Trust me, you won't find it. Guilt doesn't follow logic." "Do you feel guilty about your sister?" "Every day. I should have been there. Should have convinced her to study somewhere safer. Should have." He stopped, recognizing the futility of the words even as he spoke them. "Yeah, I feel guilty." Sareth shifted closer, not quite touching, but near enough that he could feel the cooler temperature of her skin. "On my world, we play strategy games to train leadership. Pure logic, no emotion. I was very good at them." She pulled a worn deck of cards from her pocket, something she must have taken from his ship. "Will you teach me a human game instead?" Ethan stared at the cards, recognizing them. Amara's deck. She'd invented a bluffing game using modified rules, something about reading people instead of probabilities. "Yeah," he said, his throat tight, "I can do that." He dealt the cards and explained the rules, watching Sareth's brow furrow in concentration. She was terrible at bluffing. Every attempted deception showed in the subtle shifts of her skin tone, paling when she held weak cards, deepening when she thought she had an advantage. After the 3rd hand, Ethan started laughing, genuine and unexpected. "Your face, your entire body is telling me everything." Sareth looked down at her hands, watching the colors shift. "This is why we're trained to suppress emotional response. It makes us vulnerable." "Or honest," Ethan said. The word felt important somehow. She met his eyes, and her skin flickered through shades he couldn't name, settling on something deeper than fear, but lighter than the anger he'd seen earlier. In the dim emergency lighting, she looked less alien and more like someone he was beginning to understand. The moment shattered as Maya's signal pinged his comm, 3 short bursts that meant danger, not clearance. Ethan pulled up his scanner feed and watched in cold horror as multiple heat signatures converged on their location. Corporate security from one direction, Valeth military signatures from another. "They found us," Sareth whispered. Ethan grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the emergency stairs. Her fingers were cool in his grip, trembling slightly. They'd bought themselves hours, maybe a day. Now the walls were closing in, and he had no idea where to run next. The flooded lower levels reeked of industrial rot and stagnant water, but Ethan had learned years ago that corporate security rarely ventured into sections marked condemned. He and Sareth waded through chest-deep water that glowed faintly with bioluminescent algae, their movements creating ripples that spread across the darkness. Behind them, voices and scanner pulses echoed through the facility, but the water dampened thermal signatures and the algae confused biological sensors. They surfaced in the old district 3 miles from the reclamation facility, crawling out through a drainage grate into an alley between buildings that predated the corporate restructuring. Ethan's clothes clung to him, heavy and cold. Sareth looked worse. Her skin had taken on a sickly pale cast, and she shivered despite claiming her species regulated temperature differently than humans. "Keep moving," Ethan said, though exhaustion made every word an effort. They found shelter in a condemned apartment tower, its lower floors sealed by municipal order, but accessible through a rusted fire escape. The unit Ethan chose had most of its windows intact and no obvious structural damage, though water stains on the ceiling suggested the roof leaked. He wedged a chair under the door handle and only then allowed himself to collapse against the wall. Sareth sank down beside him, her breathing labored. Despite everything, she'd kept pace through conditions that should have broken someone raised in imperial luxury. Her pointed ears were still tracking sounds he couldn't hear, alert even in exhaustion. "You did well," he said. "Down there, most people would have panicked. Most people haven't spent their lives preparing to lead during crisis." She paused, "Though I was never preparing for this particular crisis." The words carried bitter humor, and Ethan found himself almost smiling. Then reality reasserted itself. His ship was gone. His identification was flagged across every system. His entire life had been dismantled in less than 72 hours because he'd chosen to protect someone he barely knew. "This is what privilege looks like," he said, anger rising despite his exhaustion. "You make a choice and everyone else pays the price. Did you even think about what hiding would cost the people helping you?" Sareth turned to face him, her golden eyes reflecting the faint light from the street below. "Every moment since I fled, I've thought of nothing else. The guards who might be punished for my escape. The smugglers whose networks face imperial scrutiny. You, whose life I've destroyed." Her skin darkened, not with anger, but something deeper. "But I thought about something else, too. The colonies your sister died protecting. The human children who would grow up under Valeth occupation. The soldiers on both sides who would die enforcing a peace built on fear rather than understanding." "So this is noble sacrifice? You get to feel good about your principles while I lose everything?" "No." The word was flat, final. "There's nothing noble about it. I'm a coward, Ethan. I ran because I couldn't face the truth of what I'd become, a genetic bargaining chip in a political arrangement that treats people like resources." She looked down at her hands, watching the colors shift across her skin. The marriage wasn't about ending the war. It was about producing an heir with genetic compatibility between Valeth factions, creating a biological bridge that would consolidate my mother's power. But I'm infertile. Medical testing confirmed it years ago. My mother concealed the results because revealing them would invalidate my claim to succession and destabilize our entire hierarchy. The admission landed like a physical blow. Ethan stared at her, watching the implications cascade through everything he'd assumed. "The marriage would have failed," he said slowly. "Worse, it would have been exposed as a sham, reigniting the war with both factions blaming the other for deception. My mother knew this. She planned to claim I'd been compromised by human contamination, using the scandal to justify military action against your colonies." Sareth's voice remained steady, but her skin flickered through shades that betrayed the emotion beneath. "I didn't flee an unwanted marriage. I fled a genocide my existence would justify." Ethan felt his anger drain away, replaced by something colder and more focused. They weren't being hunted to drag Sareth back to a wedding. They were being hunted to keep her truth from spreading, to maintain the carefully constructed lie that would excuse whatever violence came next. "We're both prisoners," he said. "Me from corporate exploitation that treats humans like expendable labor. You from dynastic obligation that treats you like breeding stock." "Yes." The word was quiet, but it carried acknowledgement of something fundamental shifting between them. His comm pinged Maya's encryption signature. Ethan activated the audio, keeping volume low. "You two still breathing?" "For now, what's the situation?" "Complicated. Cale Droston's corporate team isn't just hunting for bounty. Intelligence suggests he's negotiating separately with the rival Valeth faction, planning to sell Sareth to them instead of returning her to the Empress." Ethan looked at Sareth, watching her process the information. "He wants to start the war," she said. "If the rival faction captures me, my mother will assume they knew about my infertility and arrange this to humiliate her. She'll have justification for full military response." "And Earth burns in the crossfire," Maya finished. "You've got maybe 12 hours before the Valeth fleet finishes positioning in orbit. After that, your mother starts making demands backed by enough firepower to glass continents." The connection ended. Silence filled the abandoned apartment, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the building's settling structure. Ethan's mind raced through scenarios, each one ending in variations of disaster. They could run. Maya had contacts off-world, ways to disappear into the outer colonies, but that meant abandoning Earth to whatever deal the corporations and the Empire would strike. They could surrender Sereth to her mother, buying temporary peace while humanity slowly lost autonomy to Valeth control. Or they could find a third option, something neither Empire nor corporation would anticipate. "There has to be another way," he said. "What way? I'm one person, my mother commands fleets." "You're not one person. You're evidence. You're proof that the entire Imperial strategy is built on deception." Ethan stood, pacing the small room. "What if we expose it, all of it, your infertility, your mother's plan, the way both species are being manipulated into conflict?" "Who would believe me?" "Everyone, if we broadcast it right. Not through official channels, they're all controlled, but Maya has contacts in the underground networks. We could bypass Imperial censorship and corporate media control, go straight to both populations simultaneously." Sareth rose to face him, her expression uncertain. "That would destroy my mother's credibility, possibly destabilize the entire empire." "Would it stop the war?" She considered, her skin shifting through contemplative shades. "It might, if both factions and human governments were forced to negotiate publicly with populations demanding transparency." She trailed off, then met his eyes. "It's dangerous for both of us." "Everything's been dangerous since I opened that cargo container." Something changed in Sareth's expression, a softening, an acknowledgement. Her skin took on a faint luminescence, stronger than he'd seen before, casting green-tinted light across the walls. "What is that?" he asked. "Stress response, but also," she hesitated, "in my culture, this luminescence appears during moments of deep emotional connection, when we recognize someone as truly seeing us, not the role we play." Ethan understood. Somewhere between the card game and their escape through flooded tunnels, between anger and honesty, she'd stopped being the princess who destroyed his life and become someone he wanted to protect for reasons that had nothing to do with politics or payment. "Then we do this together," he said. "We find Maya's transmission hub and we tell the truth loud enough that nobody can ignore it." Sareth's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool and steady. "Together," she agreed. Outside, the city continued its oblivious rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its condemned spaces, two people were planning to gamble everything on the radical notion that honesty might prove stronger than force. Maya's orbital transmission hub turned out to be a repurposed communications satellite that corporate auditors had written off as decommissioned 5 years ago. Reaching it required stealing a shuttle from a corporate hangar on the city's western edge, a facility that Ethan's intelligence suggested housed minimal security during graveyard shift rotations, intelligence that proved optimistic when they arrived to find Kale Drostan's security teams positioned throughout the complex. "He knew we'd come here," Sareth whispered from their position behind a fuel storage tank. Or Maya told him. Ethan hated the words even as he spoke them. She survived this long by knowing when to compromise. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way. This is the only shuttle access point that isn't military-controlled, and we're out of time." Ethan checked his stolen corporate credentials, hoping they'd hold up under cursory inspection. "We improvise." They moved through the hangar with manufactured confidence. Ethan's posture suggesting he belonged, while Sareth kept her hood up and her distinctive features shadowed. 3 security checkpoints passed without incident, guards too bored or underpaid to question credentials that looked legitimate in their system. The 4th checkpoint nearly ended everything when a scanner flagged Sareth's biosignature as non-human. But Ethan's casual mention of corporate xenobiology contracts and urgent medical transport bought them enough confusion to slip past. The shuttle bay opened before them, rows of craft in various states of maintenance. Ethan chose a small personnel transport, its systems basic enough that he could hotwire the authorization codes. He was halfway through the sequence when boots echoed across the deck plating. Step away from the shuttle. Kale's voice carried corporate authority backed by the 5 armed security personnel flanking him. Princess Sereth, your value increases substantially if I deliver you to the right buyer. Sereth pushed back her hood, meeting his gaze with imperial composure. You would start a war for profit? I would capitalize on a war that's already inevitable. Your mother wants you returned. The rival faction wants you captured. I simply provide the highest bidder with their desired outcome. Kale smiled without warmth. It's just business. Business that kills millions, Ethan said. Billions die in poverty under the current system. At least war provides economic stimulus. Before Ethan could respond, the bay's secondary entrance exploded inward. Valeth soldiers poured through, their weapons trained not on Sereth but on Kale's security team. Commander Thalix walked through the chaos with measured steps, his scarred features impassive as his troops disarmed the corporate personnel with efficient brutality. Princess Sereth, Thalix said, his formal tone carrying something beneath it that Ethan couldn't quite identify. Your mother demands your return. I won't go back to legitimize her lies. I know. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Thalix's golden eyes shifted to Ethan. The human smuggler who harbored you against imperial law, you've taught her something dangerous. What's that? Ethan asked. That duty can be questioned. Thalix unsealed his sidearm, and for a moment Ethan thought this was where everything ended. Instead, the commander held it out, grip first. The Empress betrayed everything our empire claimed to stand for when she chose expedient genocide over difficult peace. I cannot stop you, but I can delay pursuit long enough for you to reach orbit. Sereth stepped forward, her skin flickering through shades of shock and grief. This is treason. They'll execute you. Then I'll die having finally served the empire I believed in, rather than the one it became. Thalix met her eyes. Your brother would have made the same choice. Honor him by succeeding where we failed. He stepped aside, his soldiers following his lead with discipline that spoke to absolute loyalty. Kale began to protest, but Thalix's troops surrounded the corporate personnel with weapons ready. The message was clear. Interference would be met with overwhelming force. Ethan and Sereth ran for the shuttle. The engines hummed to life under Ethan's hands. Systems responding to override codes that were probably already being flagged in security networks. They launched through the hangar's atmospheric shield, acceleration pressing them into their seats as the shuttle climbed toward orbit. Earth fell away beneath them, beautiful and fragile against the void. The Valeth fleet hung in formation beyond the moon, elegant warships that could reduce continents to glass. Ethan plotted an approach vector to Maya's satellite, his hands steady despite the proximity alerts chiming as patrol craft moved to intercept. They're hailing us, Sereth said from the co-pilot station. Ignore them, we're committed now. The satellite grew in their viewport, ancient solar panels still gathering energy, its transmitter array powerful enough to punch through atmospheric interference and military jamming. Ethan matched rotation and docked with the manual precision of someone who'd spent years making impossible approaches. Inside, the satellite's interior was cramped and cold, life support minimal. Ethan activated the transmission array while Sereth prepared her statement, her fingers moving across the holographic interface with growing confidence. The broadcast would reach every network simultaneously. Valeth military channels, human news feeds, underground resistance networks, even the rival faction's diplomatic corps. Ready? Ethan asked. Sereth nodded, positioning herself before the recording equipment. Her skin had settled into natural emerald tones, no longer shifting with suppressed emotion. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of imperial training, but none of its distance. I am Sereth Vellani, and I speak to all who will listen. My mother, Empress Kalis, has deceived both our people and yours. The marriage she arranged was designed to fail, its collapse justifying military expansion into human territory. I fled not from duty, but from complicity in genocide. She detailed everything, her infertility, the genetic requirements, the manufactured crisis. She spoke of her brother's death and Ethan's sisters, of the ways both species had been manipulated into viewing each other as threats rather than potential partners. She didn't plead or demand. She simply offered truth and asked both populations to imagine what peace might look like if built on honesty rather than fear. When she finished, Ethan transmitted the broadcast across every available frequency. The signal propagated outward at light speed, unstoppable and undeniable. Proximity alarms shrieked, multiple vessels converging, imperial, corporate, human military responding to the unauthorized transmission. They had minutes before someone decided to silence them permanently. "We should go," Ethan said. "Where? We've burned every safe harbor." "Then we face what comes, together." Sareth's luminescence flared, brighter than he'd seen before, casting green light across the satellite's cramped interior. She took his hand, and he felt her pulse through their joined fingers, faster than human but steady. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I. But I know we gave people a choice. That's more than either of us had before." The first ships arrived, human military, moving to secure the satellite. Ethan tensed, expecting weapons lock, but instead came a hail requesting peaceful boarding. Through the viewport, he watched as the Valeth fleet's formation shifted, no longer poised for immediate assault but holding defensive positions. The broadcast had bought them time, forcing governments to negotiate under public scrutiny rather than in darkness. Over the following hours, as diplomats and military officers cycled through the satellite, as news networks dissected Sareth's testimony and populations demanded accountability, something unprecedented emerged. Not peace. Peace would take years to build, but the possibility of peace. The understanding that both species had been victims of leaders who valued control over cooperation. The Empress's authority fractured under internal challenges from nobility who questioned her deception. The rival faction withdrew military threats when their own populations demanded explanations. Human governments, exposed for their willingness to sacrifice colonies for corporate profit, faced elections that would reshape political landscapes. Sareth became something more complicated than a fugitive princess, a symbol, a mediator, someone whose rejection of prescribed roles had opened space for others to question their own. She negotiated as an individual rather than an imperial representative, her credibility rooted in the vulnerability she'd chosen to display. Ethan stayed beside her through negotiations that stretched into weeks, his presence a reminder that meaningful change required people willing to stand together when institutions demanded otherwise. They became partners in a project larger than either had imagined, building bridges through honesty and shared recognition that both their species contained multitudes beyond the categories their leaders had imposed. They didn't know if what they were building would last. Love between species remained complicated by biology and culture. Peace between civilizations required constant vigilance and compromise. But in the quiet moments between diplomatic sessions, when Sareth's skin glowed softly in the darkness and Ethan's hand found hers with automatic certainty, they understood something fundamental. They had earned the right to try, not because destiny demanded it, but because they'd chosen courage over safety, connection over isolation, truth over comfortable lies. In a universe vast and often hostile, that choice mattered more than certainty. Together they would face whatever came next.